Okay, so finally getting to a little bit of math here. This is just going to be a very brief little lesson on fractions. It's pretty basic, and I have a lot of stuff behind the scenes for you there. So let's get to some math. Um, like fractions, common denominator. So like fractions, common denominator is indicating both fractions are part of the same whole. And again, I have a bunch of definitions and exercises behind the scenes here, but just to kind of go through it. 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 2/2. So again, the denominator is indicating the total. So 2/2 equal 1. 1/5 plus 3/5 equals 4/5. These are known as proper fractions. When the numerator is equal to or smaller than the denominator, we have proper fractions. So if we get into reducing proper fractions, for instance, we have 1/8 plus 3/8. Most times in teaching, you'll use the pi reference. So if we cut the pi into fives, or if we cut the pi into eighths, we have one piece, and then we have three pieces. This is usually what my little guy eats, and this is usually what I eat. So together we have eaten 4/8 of the pizza, otherwise known as 2/4 of the pizza, also known as 1/2. But this is a method that is not exactly common. I wouldn't say uncommon, but since 4 is part, 4 in the sense goes into, we have 4 to 4 and 8 to 4, and this can also be reduced to 1/2. Again, the language of fractions, for the language of division for me is a little odd sometimes, I suppose. So if we get to improper fractions, so where the numerator is larger than the denominator, for example 4/3, we have 3/3, which equals 1, plus 1/3, 1 extra third. So we have 1 and 1/3, and this is known as a mixed number. So here we have an improper fraction, and when we change that into this form, we have a mixed number. So 8/3 would be 3/3, which equals 1, plus another 3/3, and we have 6/3 exhausted, and there's 2/3 remaining. 1 plus 1 equals plus 2/3. We have 2 and 2/3. We can approach this a different sort of way, where 8/3, basically how many times does 3 go into 8? It goes 2 times, and then there's 2/3 remaining. So we can also deal with it in those terms, 2 and 2/3. So a mixed number, a whole number, and a proper fraction, essentially. So we have, is what we have up here. So 2 and 2/3. If we want to go from mixed to improper, we just sort of work backwards. So we have 2 and 2/3 would be 3 times 2 is 6, plus the other 2. So we have 3 times 2 equals 6, plus the remaining 2/3, we have 8/3. So we go from a mixed number into an improper fraction. So again, another example of that, 5 1/8. 8 times 5 gives you 40, plus the extra 1/8. So 40 plus the 1/8, 41. And then just to finish it off, a similar method, 7 1/4 gives you 28, plus 1/4 gives you 29. Or you could sort of deal with it in these terms, where you just have the whole parts made up, multiplied by 7, plus the 1 left over. Whichever way suits you best. So if we take this in simple terms, 6 goes into 12 twice, 3 goes into 9 3 times. So you have 5. Now if we take these same numbers and we just add 1 to each, so 13/6 and 10/3. Now what we have to do is, we could go through the process of common denominator and all that, but if we're just going to use this system here, find a common denominator for the two. And now, if we just multiply these two denominators, what number we come up with, both will factor into that number. So we have 18. So both 6 and 3 factor into 18, which makes the common denominator. So now we can treat it as if we're just adding improper fractions. So we got, or I guess, depending on the fraction, but either way, two fractions with the same denominator. So we have now what we need to do, multiply the numerator by the same factor that gave us 18. So in this case, 6 times 3 gave us 18. So we're going to multiply the numerator by 3. In this case, 3 times 6 gave us 18. So we're going to multiply the numerator by 6. So if we just take these two over here, 13 times 3 over 18 plus 10 times 6 over 18 gives us 39 plus 60 over 18 gives us 99 over 18. Now, how many times does 18 go into 99? 5, and there's 9 18ths left. You can also reduce this again to 5.5. If we do the same thing, 5 over 2, 7 over 3, 2 times 3 gives us 6. So we're going to multiply the numerator by 3, numerator by 2, gives us 29 over 6, gives us 4 5/6. So here, if we have add mixed numbers and unlike fractions, 2 4/8, 3 3/6, we sort of kept it simple here. So we go through the process, gives us 28ths, gives us 21/6. We have to find a common denominator for the two. 8 times 6 gives us 48. So we will multiply this numerator by 6. We'll multiply this numerator by 8. Gives us 120 plus 168 over 48. Gives us 288 over 48. So 48 goes into 288 6 times with the decimal left over. Sorry, with no decimal left over. And so just to elaborate on this here, 2 4/8, 3 3/6, well, that's 2.5, 3.5. So you got 5 plus a half gives you 6. So if we take similar numbers, now instead of 4/8 we got 5/8, instead of 3/6 we got 4/6. We go through the same sequence. 8 times 6 is 48, 126, 170. Now we have something that is not a whole number. 302 to 48, or 302, 48, gives us 6.2. So we'll deal with the decimal after, but 6 times 8, 48, so that gives us 288. So the remaining, the difference between 302 and 288 is 14. So 14/48, so 6 and 14/48 remaining. We can reduce this down to 6 7/24. So if you think of this in terms of inches, so it's broken into 24 pieces. Now, relative to tape measures, this is just a basic fraction, but in tape measures we deal with they deal it into 16, 32nds, and 64ths. So if we deal with it in those terms, because we'll get into the tape measures and all that kind of stuff, so 2 3/4, 3 5/16, go through the same sequence. 4 times 16, 64, 176, 212, over 64, 388, 6.06. 6 times 64 gives you 384. The difference between them is 4 remaining, so 4 64ths. And if we reduce this fraction down to 6 1/16, that is a little more how we would be dealing with things in terms of tape measures. So adding the subtraction pretty much sets the groundwork for, or adding fractions pretty much sets the groundwork for how the rest of it unfolds. But subtract like and unlike fractions. So 3/8 minus 1/8 gives us 2/8. We reduce this down to 1/4. 3/4 minus 1/5. Well, we have to find a common denominator there. So we have 15 minus 4 over 20 gives us 11/20. And if we take a mixed number and we reduce that down to an improper fraction, again, we go through the same sequence. 21 minus 8 over 6 gives us 13/6. It gives us 2 1/6. So, multiplying fractions, not too crazy. 3 times 1/4. 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 gives us 3/4. 3 times 1/2 gives us a half plus a half plus a half gives us 3/2. Gives us an improper fraction. Put it into a mixed number, gives us 1/2. If we take 3/4 times 1/2, so we got a 1/2 of 3/4. And this is why metric is so nice. But we can just convert, so 4 times 2, very similar, want a common denominator, but we're going to just multiply. So we have to go, we're just going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator. So 4 times 2 is 8, 3 times 1 is 3. So we have 3/8. And if you can see here, we got 3/4 right here. Now each quarter is broken into 2/8. And if we see here 3/8, so 3/4, 1/2 of 3/4. So here's 3/4, 1/2 of that is sitting right here, which is 1, 2, 3/8. If we're going to take a mixed number, we have 2.5 times 1.5, which would give us 3.75. 5/2 times 3/2. So we have 2 times 2 is 4, 5 times 3 is 15. 4 goes into 15 3 times with 3/4 left over. So 3.75, 3 3/4. And we'll get into dividing fractions in the next video.